The war room smelled like fear. Not the sharp, sudden kind that came from a surprise attack, but the slow, heavy kind that settled into a room after too many defeats. It hung in the recycled air of the orbital fortress called the Throne of Silence, where the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy had gathered to admit something none of them wanted to say out loud. They were losing. Supreme General Vorath Kale stood at the head of the long curved table, his 6 limbs folded behind his back. He was tall, even for a Draelith, and his gray skin was covered in old scars that mapped a career stretching across 400 years of war. His 4 eyes moved slowly across the faces of the 11 other generals seated before him. He saw doubt in every one of them. That, more than anything, told him how bad things had become. The Rack Dominion had broken through the outer territories 3 months ago. Since then, they had destroyed 3 full Concord fleets, burned 6 colony worlds, and pushed deeper into protected space than any enemy had in living memory. The Rock were savage, relentless, and they learned fast. Every tactic the Concord used against them worked once and never again. Their bioships healed from damage, their soldiers felt no pain, and they had numbers that seemed to have no end. Vorath had fought many wars. He had never felt this kind of pressure before. "We are here to discuss the Alliance applications," he said, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs, specifically the one from Earth. A ripple of reaction moved around the table. Most of it was not kind. Fleet Marshal Ureni So clicked her mandibles in what passed for a laugh among the Kirin. She was small compared to the others, her insectoid body covered in shimmering blue plates, but she commanded the largest active fleet in the Concord. "Earth," she said, "the mammals. They have been in space for what, 300 of their years? What could they possibly offer us?" "Meat," rumbled Warden Osric from the far end of the table. The Gorvathi was enormous, his body made of dense muscle and something close to living stone. He had broken enemy tanks with his bare hands and was proud of it. Soft meat in tin cans, that is what they offer. A few of the generals laughed. Vorath did not. "They have applied formally through proper channels," he said. "We are required to review their offer. Ambassador Venn, please present." Ambassador Lyris Venn stepped forward from the observation gallery. She was a Lori, tall and thin, with skin that glowed faintly in shades of blue and green, depending on her mood. Right now, it was a steady, calm blue. She had spent 12 years living among humans, on their homeworld, and in their colonies. She understood them better than anyone in this room, and she knew that none of these generals would believe what she had to say. So she had brought someone who could show them instead. "Generals," she said, her voice soft but clear, "I present Colonel Idris Mwanga, military attaché of the Earth Union Defense Force." The human walked in, and Osric actually snorted. Mwanga was not impressive to look at, not by galactic standards. He was average height for a human, which made him small next to every species in the room. His skin was dark brown, his head was shaved, and he wore a simple gray uniform with no decorations except a single patch on his shoulder showing a blue planet. He did not salute, he did not bow, he did not smile. He simply walked to the presentation platform, placed a small data chip on the console, and stepped back. "What is this?" Vorath asked. "Declassified combat records," Mwanga said. His voice was calm and even. 4 engagements. Different theaters, different conditions, different enemies. We thought it would be more useful than a speech. High Tactician Severith, a lean and calculating Vorsk, with scales the color of old rust, leaned forward. "You bring us home videos instead of fleet numbers, instead of ship specifications, instead of weapons data?" Mwanga looked at him with eyes that gave away nothing. "You have enough ships and weapons. What you are lacking is something else. The records will show you what." Severith hissed softly. Several generals exchanged glances. Ureni So tilted her triangular head with what might have been curiosity. Vorath studied the human for a long moment. In 4 centuries, he had learned to read species he had never met, to find the arrogance or the fear or the hunger in their eyes. He could not read this one. The human was like a closed door. There was something behind it, but Vorath could not tell what. Very well. Load the records. The lights in the war room dimmed. The massive holographic display that filled the center of the chamber hummed to life, casting blue light across the faces of 12 of the most powerful military leaders in the known galaxy. An analyst's voice came through the system. First file loaded. Operation designation, Fallen Crown. Location, Proxima Frontier. Date by Earth calendar, March 14th, 2298. Vorath settled into his seat. Around him, the other generals did the same. Most of them looked bored. Osric had his massive arms crossed and his eyes half closed. Severith was already tapping notes into a personal device, clearly planning to write a dismissal report before the footage even ended. Ureni So cleaned her antennae with absent-minded precision. Only Ambassador Ven looked different. She stood behind the generals, and her skin had shifted from calm blue to something deeper and harder to name. She had seen humans do many things during her years among them. She had seen them laugh and cry and fight over nothing, and build beautiful things and tear them down again. She had watched them with the careful eye of a diplomat and the genuine affection of a friend. But she had never seen them fight a war, not truly. She had only heard the stories, seen the aftermath, read the reports that were carefully cleaned up for alien visitors. Now, standing in this room full of generals who thought they knew everything about war, she felt a strange emotion rise in her chest. It was close to excitement. It was close to fear. It sat right between the two, in a place she had no word for. The data chip had not been cleaned up. Colonel Mwanga had given them the raw files. The holographic display flickered, then stabilized. A star field appeared, and in it, 14 small human frigates dropped out of faster-than-light travel, into what should have been empty space. It was not empty. 63 pirate warships filled the screen, already moving into attack formation. The trap had been perfect. The humans were surrounded, outgunned, and outnumbered more than 4 to 1. Osric opened his eyes and uncrossed his arms. Even he could recognize a death sentence when he saw one. The timestamp in the corner began to count. And in the war room of the most powerful military alliance in the galaxy, 12 generals leaned forward to watch what happened next. Colonel Mwanga stood in the shadows behind them. He did not lean forward. He already knew how the story ended. The holographic display showed 14 human frigates surrounded by 63 pirate warships, and every general in the room expected the same thing: retreat. It was standard doctrine across every species in the Concord. When outgunned 4 to 1, you pulled back, regrouped, and returned with better numbers. Anything else was stupidity. The human commander did not retreat. Her name appeared on the tactical overlay. Captain Adais Obi, commanding the UDS Resolute. The footage showed her face for a brief moment through a bridge camera. She was young, dark-eyed, and completely calm. She gave a single order: split and scatter. Reform inside their lines. Get close enough to kiss them. The 14 frigates broke apart like a fist opening into fingers. 5 groups, 3 ships each, with the Resolute flying alone. They did not run outward. They ran inward, firing their engines at maximum burn directly into the enemy formation. Then, impossibly, they made micro-jumps, tiny, faster-than-light hops lasting less than a second each, appearing and disappearing inside the pirate fleet like ghosts. Ureni So sat up straight. Her mandibles stopped clicking. The pirate ships were built for long-range bombardment. Their heavy guns needed distance and time to lock targets. But the human frigates were now so close that the pirates could not fire without hitting their own ships. It was like watching someone charge into a crowd of sword fighters and press so close that no blade could swing. The humans opened fire at point-blank range. They targeted engines first, then weapons, then bridges. They moved constantly, sliding between enemy hulls, using the pirates' own ships as shields. The pirate formation collapsed into chaos. Ships collided trying to turn. Friendly fire tore through their own ranks. In 11 minutes, 41 pirate vessels were destroyed. 9 more were captured. Captain Obi lost 2 frigates and brought the rest home with damage that could be repaired in a week. The footage ended. The war room was quiet. Vorath Kale stared at the frozen tactical display for a long time. No Concord species deliberately jumps into an enemy formation, he said slowly. It is considered suicide. From the shadows, Colonel Mwanga's voice was flat and simple. We call it Tuesday. Nobody laughed. The second record began. The display shifted to a planet, green and blue, orbited by a fleet of mercenary warships. Kepler 442b, a human colony of 400,000 people, besieged by a force that outgunned the small garrison 10-1. The mercenary commander demanded surrender, and gave the colonists 1 day to comply. The garrison commander was a man named Major Tomas Herrera. The footage showed him sitting in a basement command center, surrounded by equipment that was mostly broken, drinking something from a metal cup. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days, and he was smiling. Instead of surrendering, Herrera launched a deception campaign that made Severett's scales change color. He used the colony's communications array to broadcast fake fleet signatures, hundreds of them, scattered across nearby space, each one perfectly mimicking the energy pattern of a heavy cruiser. He sent drones into orbit, empty hulls stuffed with heaters and signal generators, each one screaming to enemy sensors that it was a fully crewed warship. Then he sent a message to the mercenary commander. He did not beg for mercy. He offered the mercenary generous surrender terms, calmly explaining that the mercenary fleet was now surrounded by a UDF battle group, and that resistance would result in total destruction. There was nothing but a tired man with broken machines, some empty drones, and a talent for lying that bordered on art. The mercenary commander hesitated. He ran scans. The fake signatures looked real. His intelligence said no UDF fleet was in range, but the signatures were right there on his sensors. Was his intelligence wrong? Was this a trap? Had the humans planned this all along? He hesitated for 72 hours. By the time he realized the truth, actual human reinforcements had arrived. The mercenary fleet surrendered without a fight. Fleet Marshal Yereni So whispered something in her own language. Ambassador Ven, standing behind her, heard it clearly. Translated, it meant, they weaponize lies the way we weaponize numbers. The third record was different from the first 2. There were no ships in this one, only mud, rain, and human soldiers walking through hell. Tethys 4 was a jungle moon with gravity 1.5 times Earth standard. The air was toxic without filters. The ground was a swamp that swallowed machines whole. A Concord Allied force had been sent to clear a rack outpost on the moon. But their vehicles sank within hours. Their powered armor joints clogged with mud, and their supply lines collapsed. The operation stalled. The human Marines attached to the force were given the choice to wait for orbital support. They refused. Their commanding officer, a woman named Sergeant Major Priya Anand, looked at the swamp, looked at her soldiers, and made a decision that left the Gorvathi units watching in disbelief. She ordered her Marines to strip off their powered armor. They marched 140 kilometers through toxic swampland in nothing but basic suits and breathing masks. They carried their weapons on their backs. When their electronics failed from the moisture, they navigated by the stars. When their rations ran out on day 6, they ate local plants that their medic had tested by eating first. When soldiers fell from exhaustion, others carried them. It took 9 days. They arrived behind the rock outpost, covered in filth, half-starved, running on nothing but stubbornness. They attacked at dawn with whatever they had left, and broke the enemy line in 40 minutes. Warden Osric had risen to his feet without realizing it. His stone-gray hands were clenched at his sides. He was the strongest being in this room, and he knew it. But something about watching those small, fragile humans drag themselves through 9 days of poison and gravity and pain made his strength feel like a small thing. "They do not break," he said quietly. "Why do they not break?" Ambassador Ven answered from behind him. "They call it will." The fourth record started, and the room changed. It was a hyperspace lane, a critical corridor connecting 2 Concord sectors. A rock Dominion vanguard of 200 warships was moving through it, heading for a cluster of colony worlds where evacuation ships were still loading civilians. Someone needed to hold the lane long enough for those ships to escape. 6 human destroyers were all that stood in the way. The squadron commander was Captain James Achabe. His voice came through the recording, steady and sure, as he addressed his crews. "We hold this lane. We do not move. We do not leave. We give those people time." They held for 11 hours. The footage was hard to watch. Ship after ship took damage that should have ended the fight. The UDS Covenant lost its main gun in the first hour, and continued fighting with secondary batteries. The UDS Iron Will lost half its crew to a hull breach, and the surviving crews sealed the breach with cargo containers and kept firing. One by one, the destroyers were torn apart. Not one ship retreated. They had been given permission to withdraw after the 6th hour. Every captain refused. The last ship, the UDS Standing Ground, fought alone for the final 90 minutes. Its captain was dead. Its first officer was dead. A 23-year-old lieutenant named Sarah Voss commanded from an auxiliary bridge with a crew of 19. She held the lane until her reactor failed and the ship went dark. The last transmission came through the speakers of the war room, and 12 alien generals heard a young woman's voice, tired and calm. "Tell our families we stood." The recording ended. The holographic display went dark. Nobody moved. The silence was so complete that Vorath could hear the hum of the station's life support systems. The Rack Vanguard had been delayed long enough. The evacuation succeeded. 4.2 million civilians survived because 6 ships and their crews decided that their lives were worth spending. Vorath Kale turned slowly in his seat and looked at Colonel Mwanga, who stood exactly where he had been standing since the beginning, his face unchanged. "How many soldiers does Earth have?" Vorath asked. His voice was very quiet. Mwanga told him. The number moved through the room like a cold wind. Uraniso's glow dimmed. Osric sat down heavily. Even Severith stopped tapping at his device. Vorath looked at the dark display where moments ago a young woman had given her life to buy time for strangers, and for the first time in 400 years of war, the Supreme General of the Galactic Concord did not know what to say. The silence lasted for nearly a full minute after the records ended. In a room full of generals who had spent their lives commanding millions, that silence said more than any words could. It was the silence of creatures who had just seen something they did not fully understand, and were not sure they wanted to. Vorath Kale broke it first. "We will now discuss the alliance proposal from Earth. All opinions will be heard." The room erupted. Warden Osric slammed one massive fist on the table hard enough to crack the surface. "Give them ground command," he said, his gravelly voice carrying over the others. "Every ground operation, all of them. I have watched my soldiers stall in conditions half as harsh as that swamp. Those humans walked through poison for 9 days and then fought a battle." He shook his enormous head. "I have never seen anything like it. They will win it. You would hand command to a species we met barely a generation ago? High Tactician Severett's voice was cold and sharp. His yellow eyes moved around the table, measuring reactions. Based on 4 recordings, this is exactly the kind of emotional thinking that has cost us 3 fleets. There was nothing emotional about what we just watched, said Fleet Marshal Yereni So. The Curon commander had been quiet during the records, her compound eyes absorbing everything. Now she spoke with a precision that came from decades of analyzing enemy movements. I have studied the combat doctrines of every species in the Concord, and every enemy we have faced. All of them follow patterns. The Rock use overwhelming aggression. The Gorvathi use material superiority. We Curon use coordinated swarm tactics. Every species develops a doctrine and follows it. She paused, her mandibles clicking softly. Humans do not follow a doctrine. They invent a new one for every battle. They looked at that pirate fleet and invented close-range chaos. They looked at that siege and invented a lie so elaborate that it held for 3 days. They looked at that swamp and threw away their technology and walked. They looked at that hyperspace lane and decided that dying was an acceptable tactic. She turned to Severeth. The Rock Dominion has learned to counter everything we do. They cannot counter humans, because humans do not do the same thing twice. That is not emotion. That is the most dangerous kind of intelligence. Severeth was not convinced. He stood, his tall reptilian frame casting a long shadow across the table. You are all acting like fools, drunk on spectacle, he said. Yes, the records are impressive. I do not deny their capability. What I question is their controllability. He walked slowly along the table, speaking to each general in turn. Consider what we have just seen. A species that charges into superior forces for fun. A species that treats deception as a basic tool. A species whose soldiers choose death over retreat, not because they are ordered to, but because they want to. He stopped and let those words settle. Now ask yourselves this. Today they are small. Today they need us. But what happens in 50 years, 100, when they have our technology, our star maps, our resources, when they do not need us anymore? He placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. If this is what they do to enemies they have never met, what will they do to allies who have outlived their usefulness? The room went quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. This was the quiet of doubt. General Morath, an elder Pellin with feathered limbs and sad eyes, spoke for the first time. The Vorsk makes a fair point. We have invited predators into our home before, but never like this. Never so soon. It has never ended well. Vorath Kale listened to all of this without expression. His 4 eyes moved from speaker to speaker, tracking the mood of the room like a captain tracking the wind. He could feel the council splitting. Half were drawn to humanity by what they had seen. Half were frightened by the same thing. He turned to the one person in the room who had actually lived among humans. Ambassador Venn, you have spent more time with this species than anyone in the Concord. What do you say? Lyris Venn stepped forward. Her bioluminescent skin was shifting through shades of violet, a color that meant she was choosing her words with great care. I lived on Earth for 12 years, she said. I walked their cities. I ate their food. I listened to their music. I watched their children play in parks while their parents argued about things that did not matter. She paused. I also visited their war memorials. They have thousands of them. Millions of names carved into stone, on every continent and on every colony world. She looked at Severeth directly. High Tactician, you are right to be cautious. Humans are dangerous, but you are wrong about why. You think they are dangerous because they are aggressive. They are not. I have seen more casual cruelty in a Vorsk trading outpost than I ever saw on Earth. Severed's scales shifted, but he said nothing. Humans are dangerous, Venn continued, because they care. They fight hardest not when they are threatened, but when something they love is threatened. Those 6 destroyers did not hold that lane because of orders or duty codes or military programming. They held it because there were families on those evacuation ships. That is what makes them terrifying. Their violence is not random. It is not mindless. It is driven by love, and love has no upper limit. She turned to face the full council. You ask what happens if they turn on us. I will tell you what happens if you try to turn on them. You saw what 6 ships did to buy time for strangers. Imagine what their entire species would do to protect their children. There is no force in this galaxy that could survive that war. The only safe place to stand is beside them. The room buzzed with low conversation. Generals whispered to their aides. Datapads flickered with calculations and projections. The council was divided, and Vorath could feel it tilting one way then another, like a ship caught between 2 currents. Then Colonel Mwanga spoke. He had been silent through the entire debate, standing in the shadows at the edge of the room as if he were furniture. Every general had nearly forgotten he was there. When his voice came, it was quiet, and they all turned to listen. You have spent the last hour discussing what we are, he said. Whether we are useful, whether we are dangerous, whether we are controllable. He stepped forward into the light. And for the first time, Vorath saw something in the man's eyes. Not anger, not pride. Something older and heavier than both. You have seen what we do when we are defending strangers, Mwanga said. People we have never met, colonies we have no connection to, ships full of civilians whose names we will never know. That is what we do for strangers. He looked at Severith. Imagine what we would do defending our home. It was not a threat. His voice held no heat, no challenge. He said it the way someone might state that water is wet or that stars are hot. It was simply a fact, and every general in the room understood it as one. Vorath Kale held the human's gaze for a long moment, then nodded. We will take a recess. The vote will be held in 1 hour. The generals began to rise and scatter into smaller groups. Arguments continued in hallways and private rooms. Alliances formed and broke and reformed. Aides ran numbers and presented scenarios. The fate of the compact hung in the balance, and no one could say which way it would fall. During the recess, Ambassador Ven found Severith standing alone in an observation corridor, looking out at the stars. You will lose this vote, she told him. Perhaps, he said without turning, but I will be proven right eventually. They are not like us, Ambassador. They are something else entirely, and something else entirely is what you should fear most. Or, Ven said quietly, it is what you should want most when the Rock are at your door. Before Severith could answer, every light in the corridor turned red. An alarm screamed through the station, sharp and piercing and impossible to ignore. Ven grabbed the wall as the fortress shuddered under her feet. She ran to the nearest tactical screen and felt her blood go cold. A Rock Dominion armada had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. 40 warships, already moving toward the planet below. The Concord Defense Fleet was 6 hours away. The fortress had no meaningful weapons. There was nothing between the Rock and Verith Prime except empty space, and 3 human frigates. Ven looked down the corridor and saw Colonel Mwanga walking the other way, toward the command center, moving with the steady, unhurried pace of a man who had been expecting this all along. He was already speaking into his communicator, and the words he said were calm and simple. Wake them up. Doctrine 7. Ambassador Ven watched him disappear around the corner, and realized that the violet color of her skin had changed. It was now something she had never seen on herself before. It was the color of awe. The tactical display in the war room lit up like a wound. 40 red markers, each one representing a Rack Dominion warship, moved in a tight formation toward Verith Prime. Against them, 3 blue markers drifted near the orbital fortress. 3 small dots against a tide of red. The generals rushed back to the war room. The recess was over. The debate was over. This was real, and it was happening now. Voreth Kale took one look at the display and felt 400 years of command experience tell him the same thing. This was unwinnable. The Concord defense fleet was 6 hours away. The fortress had light point defense weapons, nothing that could stop capital ships. Vareth Prime was a neutral world with 12 million civilians on its surface. If the Rak reached orbit, there would be nothing anyone could do. Colonel Mwanga was already standing at the tactical console, speaking to his ships through a channel that hummed with static. Defiant, Nzinga, Crazy Horse. This is Mwanga. Rak Vanguard, 40 contacts, bearing 073, Doctrine 7, rules of engagement are free, make them bleed. 3 voices answered, 3 captains, each commanding a frigate barely a tenth the size of a Rak cruiser. Their voices were steady. Vorath turned to the human. Colonel, you cannot be serious. 3 frigates against 40 warships is not a battle, it is an execution. It is a delay, Mwanga said without looking up. Your fleet arrives in 6 hours. I need to buy 6 hours, that is all. You will die. Probably, but those are 12 million people down there. Mwanga finally looked at him, and his dark eyes were as calm as a lake on a windless day. May I have tactical command? Vorath hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Then he nodded. Granted. Mwanga turned back to the console. The entire war room watched. The 3 blue dots began to move. The first thing the humans did made no sense to anyone watching. The UDS Defiant broke away from the other 2 ships and flew directly toward the Rock fleet on an intercept course. Then it opened a communication channel, not an encrypted military channel, an open broadcast on all frequencies that the Rock could hear. The voice of Commander Torres, captain of the Defiant, filled the war room. Attention Rock fleet. This is the Earth Union warship Defiant. I want to speak to whoever is in charge of this sad little parade. We have been watching your approach, and I have to say, I have seen faster movement from sleeping animals. Is your fleet commander awake, or does someone need to bring him warm milk? Urini Saw's mandibles parted in shock. Is he insulting them? Yes, said Mwanga. On purpose? The Rock prize honor above strategy. Insult their commander publicly, and he will respond with anger instead of tactics. Angry commanders make mistakes. It worked. The Rock fleet formation shifted. 15 ships broke away from the main body and accelerated toward the Defiant at maximum speed, their weapons charging. The Rock commander had taken the bait. He had split his force. The Defiant turned and ran, but not toward open space. It ran toward the shattered remains of Vareth's dead moon, a vast field of broken rock and twisted metal that spread across thousands of kilometers. The Nzinga and Crazy Horse were already inside it, waiting. The 15 Rock ships chased the Defiant into the debris field. It was dark in there. Sensors scattered off the rocks. Targeting systems struggled with false returns from the dense metal fragments. Then the trap closed. Mines detonated in a chain along the path the Rak ships had followed. EMP buoys fired, killing power systems and shields. Sensor decoys lit up across the field, each one screaming like a warship, turning the Rak targeting computers into useless noise. The 3 human frigates appeared from behind asteroids, from inside hollowed-out rocks, from places no sane captain would hide a ship, and they opened fire at ranges so close that the Rak crews could have thrown stones at them. 9 Rak ships died in the first 4 minutes. Explosions lit up the debris field like a sunrise. The surviving 6 tried to retreat and found the exit blocked by mines they had not seen on the way in. Warden Osric watched the display with his mouth open. He had never seen one this precise, this savage. this perfectly designed to turn every advantage the enemy had into a weakness. "When did they have time to set this?" he demanded. Mwanga answered without emotion. "My captains began mining the debris field 2 hours ago, when we first detected the rock fleet's approach vector. We assumed they would come this way. We prepared." 2 hours, Osric repeated. "You built a killing field in 2 hours." "We work fast when we are motivated." But the battle was far from over. 25 rock warships still held formation outside the debris field, and their commander had stopped being angry. He was being careful now, holding position and scanning for more traps. The delay was working, but 25 ships could still reach the planet. Mwanga gave a new order, and the 3 frigates did something that made every general in the room hold their breath. They flew out of the debris field and straight at the remaining 25 ships. 3 against 25, head on. The frigates used a technique the humans called rotating shield harmonics. They cycled their shield frequencies in rapid patterns that made each ship appear on enemy sensors as multiple targets. Combined with constant micro-jumps, the 3 frigates looked like 30. The rock fleet, already shaken by the ambush, spread their fire across dozens of phantom targets, while the real ships slipped through the gaps. The Defiant took out a cruiser's engine array with a torpedo salvo from below. The Crazy Horse disabled 2 destroyers by targeting their exposed reactor vents. The Nzinga danced between 3 enemy ships, drawing their fire into each other. It was chaos, and the humans thrived in chaos. Then the Nzinga took a direct hit. The shot came from a rock battlecruiser that had held its fire, waiting for a clear target. The blast tore through the Nzinga's port side and killed the engines. The frigate began to drift, trailing fire and debris. Secondary explosions rippled through her hull. In the war room, the blue dot representing the Nzinga flickered. The ship was dying. Mwanga's hands tightened on the console, but his voice did not change. He opened a channel. "Nzinga, this is Mwanga, status." The voice that came back belonged to Captain Anika Johal. It was strained, but controlled. "Engines gone. Weapons at 30%. Reactor containment failing. We have maybe 8 minutes before she blows. Eject your crew, Captain." There was a pause, a long one. Then Johal spoke again, and every being in the war room heard the words clearly. "Negative, Colonel. We can see their flagship from here, 2,000 meters off our bow. If we push the reactor to overload and light the drive one last time, we can reach it." Mwanga closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them, they were wet. But his voice was rock. "Understood, Captain. It has been an honor." "Likewise, sir." Nzinga out. The crew of the Nzinga did not eject. They overloaded their reactor, pointed their dying ship at the rock flagship, and fired every remaining engine at full power. The frigate crossed 2,000 meters in seconds, accelerating even as fires burned through her decks. The collision was blinding. The Nzinga hit the rock flagship dead center, and detonated with the force of a small star. The explosion consumed the flagship and 4 escort ships that were too close to escape. A ball of white fire bloomed in the darkness of space, and when it faded, there was nothing left of any of them. The last transmission from the Nzinga, recorded just before impact, played through the war room speakers. It was the ship's motto, spoken in unison by every surviving member of the crew. "We carry the storm." Yureni So was trembling. Her compound eyes reflected the fading light of the explosion, and she could not look away. She had commanded millions of soldiers. She had sent thousands to their deaths. But she had never heard anyone sound like that. Not afraid, not brave. Something beyond both. The remaining rock ships broke. Without their flagship, without their commander, rattled by the ambush and the ghost ships and the burning wreck of a frigate that had turned itself into a weapon, they scattered. The Defiant and Crazy Horse hunted them through the debris field for another hour, destroying or disabling 11 more before the Concorde fleet finally arrived. Final count: 3 human frigates against 40 rock warships. 25 rock destroyed, 6 disabled, 9 fled. 1 human frigate lost with all hands. The 2 surviving frigates limped back toward the fortress, venting atmosphere and leaking fire from a dozen wounds. And the generals, watching on the tactical display, saw something that none of them would ever forget. The humans were already repairing, already rearming, already preparing to fight again. Vorath Kale stood very still for a very long time. Then he reached out and turned off the tactical display. The war room fell dark. In that darkness, he turned to face the 11 other generals, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of everything they had just witnessed. "I will speak now," he said, "and then we will vote." The war room was dark, except for the faint glow of Ambassador Ven's skin, and the dim emergency lights that lined the walls. The main display was off. The battle was over. The Concorde relief fleet had arrived, and was now sweeping the system for any remaining rock ships. Outside the fortress, 2 battered human frigates drifted in the quiet of space, their hulls scarred and their lights flickering, but still alive. Vorath Kale stood at the head of the table and looked at the 11 generals before him. He had known most of them for over a century. He had fought beside some of them, argued with others, and buried a few of their predecessors. He had never spoken to them the way he was about to speak now. "I have commanded armies for 400 years, he began. His deep voice was steady, but there was something different in it, something raw. "I have fought the Kiran border wars. I have held the line at Gorvathi Prime. I have seen species rise and fall and rise again. I have studied every military doctrine ever written by any civilization in this galaxy." He paused and looked down at his hands, all 6 of them folded together on the table. "I have never seen anything like what we witnessed today." He raised his eyes and swept them across the room. "Not the technology. Their ships are adequate but nothing special. Not the weapons. We have better. Not their numbers. They are still a small species by galactic standards. What I saw today, and in those records, is something that no amount of ships or guns or soldiers can replicate." He turned to Osric. "Warden, you asked why they do not break. I have been thinking about that question for the last 2 hours, and I believe I have the answer. They do not break because they have decided not to. It is that simple, and it is that terrifying. Their will is not trained into them. It is not programmed, or engineered, or bred. It comes from somewhere inside them that I do not fully understand, and I have spent 4 centuries studying the nature of war." He turned to Ureni So. "Fleet Marshal, you said they invent new tactics for every battle. You are correct, but it is more than that. They do not just adapt to circumstances. They refuse to accept circumstances. When the situation is impossible, they do not retreat, and they do not surrender. They change the situation. They rewrite the rules of the fight until the rules favor them. I have never seen a species do this so naturally, so instinctively, as if the universe itself is something they feel entitled to argue with." A few generals shifted in their seats. Vorath was speaking with a conviction they had rarely heard from him. The old general was not making an argument. He was making a confession. "I know what Severith will say," Vorath continued, turning to the Vorsk tactician. "He will say they are dangerous. He is right. He will say that allying with them is a risk. He is right about that too." He held Severith's yellow gaze. "But I will tell you something else that is true. The Rock Dominion is at our gates. They have beaten us 3 times. They will beat us again. We are running out of ships, running out of strategies, and running out of time. And today 3 small human frigates did what no Concorde fleet has managed in 3 months. They faced the Rock, and the Rock ran." He let that sink in. Yes, they are dangerous. They may be the most dangerous species this galaxy has ever produced. And that is precisely why I want them beside us, not against us. Because if we reject them today, we face the rock alone, and we will lose. And if we reject them today and somehow survive, we will have made an enemy of the one species in this galaxy that turns defeat into victory by sheer refusal to accept it. I do not want to fight that war. No sane commander would. He straightened to his full height. I call the vote. All in favor of the alliance with Earth's Union Defense Force under the terms of the Verath Compact. Ureni So voted yes without hesitation. Warden Osric slammed his fist on the table once and said yes, and the crack in the table grew deeper. General Morath, the old Pelin who had expressed doubt, closed his sad eyes for a moment and then voted yes, saying quietly, I would rather have them as friends. One by one the generals voted, some with confidence, some with reluctance, some with fear that they were making the right choice for the wrong reasons, or the wrong choice for the right ones. The final tally was 10 in favor, 2 against. Severith voted no, as expected. He accepted the result with a stiff nod, and said nothing. The other dissenter was a quiet Morellan admiral who simply shook her head and looked away. The Verath Compact was signed. Colonel Mwanga stood at the edge of the room and watched the generals place their marks on the document. His face showed nothing, but Ambassador Ven, standing nearby, noticed that his hands had been clenched into fists since the battle ended. Only now did they slowly relax. Vorath Kale approached the human after the signing. The old Dralith towered over Mwanga, his 4 eyes looking down at a creature that was smaller, weaker, and shorter-lived than almost every other species in the room. And yet Vorath found himself choosing his words with a care he usually reserved for speaking to equals. The crew of the Nzinga, Vorath said, they chose to die. Their ship was lost. They could have ejected. Some might have survived. He paused. Why did they stay? Mwanga was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice was the same as it had always been. Calm. Even. As steady as a heartbeat. And they decided it would be them. Vorath stared at him. The answer was so simple that it almost meant nothing. And yet, it meant everything. 400 years of war, and Vorath had never heard a reason that clean, that clear, that impossible to argue with. Someone had to. They decided it would be them. I have commanded billions of soldiers across 100 worlds, Vorath said slowly. I have never understood a species less than I understand yours. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried something it had not carried in a very long time. Respect. True, unguarded respect. And I have never respected one more. Mwanga nodded once. He did not smile. He did not need to. 3 days later, Vorath Kale published an official strategic assessment to every military command in the Galactic Concord. It was a document that would be translated into 400 languages, taught in war colleges across 1,000 worlds, and debated for centuries after the war was over. It ran for 60 pages, filled with tactical analysis, force projections, and strategic recommendations. But it was the final paragraph that became the most quoted sentence in galactic military history. Let it be recorded that on this day, the War Council of the Galactic Concord formally assessed the combat capability of the species known as humanity. Our conclusion is unanimous in spirit, if not in vote. They are unstoppable, not because they cannot be killed. They die as easily as any of us. They are unstoppable because they have decided to be, and no force in this galaxy has yet found a way to change their minds. The document was filed, distributed, and within a week it had reached every corner of civilized space. Not immediately, and not all at once, but slowly and permanently, the way a river changes the shape of stone. On Earth, the news of the Verith Compact arrived on a warm evening. It was broadcast on every screen, every station, every feed across the planet and its colonies. Leaders gave speeches, crowds gathered, children waved flags they did not fully understand. In a quiet bar in Nairobi, a retired Marine named Grace Okonkwo sat alone at the counter and watched the broadcast on a small screen above the bottles. She was 63 years old. She had served 2 tours in the outer colonies and carried a piece of shrapnel in her left knee that ached when it rained. She had never met a Dryolith or a Chiron or a Gorvathi. She had never been to Verith Prime. She had never heard of Vorath Kale. But when the broadcast showed the translated text of his proclamation, she read it slowly, word by word, and something shifted behind her dark eyes. She finished her drink, set the glass down on the counter, and smiled to herself. "Took 'em long enough," she said to no one in particular. The bartender glanced at her. "You say something?" the bartender asked. "Nothing," she said, "just talking to the universe." She left a good tip and walked out into the warm Nairobi night. 6,000 light-years away, in the secure intelligence center of the Rak Dominion's Supreme Command, a translated copy of Vorath Kale's assessment arrived on the desk of Supreme Commander Raketh IV. He read it in the blue-black silence of his chamber, his massive jaw working slowly as his eyes moved across the words. When he finished, he sat still for a long time. Then he called in his senior war planner. "The campaigns targeting human-held sectors," Raketh said. "Reassess all of them." The planner hesitated. "Supreme Commander, those campaigns are already approved. Our forces are in position." "Reassess them," Raketh repeated. His voice was not angry. It was something worse. It was careful. "And add a new word to our strategic planning vocabulary." "What word, Supreme Commander?" Raketh looked at the document on his desk one more time. The last line stared back at him. "They are unstoppable because they have decided to be." "Retreat," he said. The planner stared. In the entire history of the Rock Dominion, that word had never appeared in a strategic planning document. Not once, not ever. It appeared now. And across the galaxy, in ships and stations and colonies and quiet bars, humanity went on doing what it had always done. Living, fighting, loving, refusing, with a stubbornness that bordered on madness, to be anything less than what it had decided to be. The universe had not been ready for them. It was beginning to adjust.